First of all, thank you very much for this chance to be here and study together. Thanks to Rabbi Kosh and Rabbi Khan. I'd like to welcome the Feidelbergs. Where are they? I'm very nervous now because I was taught to speak correctly by Doreen, so I'm going to have to make a special effort. At least I have the right accent. Also like to welcome David Gottlieb. Where is he? David? My partner in we collaborated on a book together that's called Letters to a Buddhist Jew, and the book's on sale off of the proceeds of Jet tonight, right? I was asked to speak about an interesting subject. It's a slightly different take on things, and that is the question of moral intuition, how we know what's right. A surprising subject. It's not, the answers are not what one would conventionally think, and I'll try to show some of the fascination of this area. Let's begin like this. There was a fascinating British philosopher called Philippa Foot. She was a very interesting lady. She was born in the 1920s. Her mother actually was born in the White House. She was the wife of Grover Cleveland. That's 1893, I think she was born here. She married a very upper crust English gentleman who was a First World War hero. And Philippa Foot was brought up in an environment where girls weren't supposed to have an education. In England, it was considered very improper for a girl to be educated. And she eventually made it to Oxford. When she was accepted to Oxford, her family's friends consoled her parents by telling them, at least she doesn't look clever. So, but she became a professor at Oxford, and she became a very highly respected and recognized philosopher. And in 1967, she wrote an article, it happened to be an article about abortion, but in this article, she proposed a scenario that feels out a particular moral dilemma, and I'd like to share with you what that was. I'm going to invite you to think it through with me. Now, you probably don't know that I'm a great artist, so I'm going to draw you a picture of the scenario that she described in this article. And here's what she said. She said, imagine that you are standing, and I'll try and move this chart around a little in case you can't all see it easily. Imagine you're standing on a trolley line, right? Trolley line. And there's a trolley coming down the line. Didn't know I was that talented. You want to draw it for me? There's a trolley coming down the line, and the problem is that tied to the track are 5 people. The Wild West cowboys have got hold of them. They've tied them to the track. You standing here by the side of the trolley line, and there's a line that goes off to the side like this. There's a lever right here, what you Americans call a lever. And if you pull this, you can divert the train onto this track. If you do nothing, 5 people are going to be wiped out by the trolley. Les, can you see? If you do nothing, 5 people are going to get wiped out. If you act fast and pull the lever, I'm modifying the case that she actually had you being the driver of the train. And that's been criticized for various reasons. But I'm simplifying it and adding in a few details. Other philosophers have dealt with it subsequently and modified her scenario. But if you pull this lever, you divert the train onto the side track. The problem is that there's a person tied to this track. One person. So that's your dilemma. If you do nothing, 5 people are going to die. If you divert the train, 1's going to die. Clear? Raise your hand if you think you should divert the train. If you would pull the lever, raise your hand. If you don't, 5 people are going to die. If you do, 1 person is going to die. Show of hands? Okay. Well over 90% of Westerners opt for what you said, right? For diverting the train. In fact, if you'd like to research this yourself, Harvard University has started a website, I think it's called Moral Dilemmas, in which they've invited the public to make choices in scenarios like this. And tens of thousands of people have logged in and made their choices. And about 95% of Westerners, people with Asian backgrounds, have slightly different priorities when it comes to an individual against a group. But Americans, and particularly American college students, About 95% of Americans say you should pull the lever. So far, so good? What would happen if the case looked like this? Trolley coming down the line. This is a bit more of a surreal trolley. 5 people on the line, and there's a bridge over the track. How's it? There's a bridge over the line, and standing on the bridge is a very big fellow. Big chap. Big enough that if you nudge him off the bridge onto the track, the train will kill him but stop. If you do nothing, 5 people get wiped out. If you bump him onto the track, he's big enough. You're not big enough. You're a scrawny, but underfed individual. And you cannot jump onto the track. That will not save the people. But if you push the big fellow onto the track, he will get killed, but stop the train killing the 5 people. If you think you should bump him off, raise your hand. No one? One person. And if you don't like the idea of getting your hands dirty, we could rig up a lever that will open a trap door and gently lower him onto the track. Right? So you will cause him to be killed, but he'll stop the train. Notice that the vast majority of you felt that we should do, in this case, take an action that would kill 1 to save 5. But none of you were prepared to do that here. Kill 1 to save 5. Why not?
You're reacting.
In both cases, you're making a choice. Doing nothing or killing 1. The only difference is in the first case,
You're pushing the guy in the second case.
in the first case, you're bringing the train to the man. In the second case, you're bringing the man to the train. That's the only difference. So why were you happy to kill 1 in the first case to save 5? But you're not happy to...
You're not using the person to stop the train. The person just happened to be there.
But 1's going to die so that 5 are saved. What's the difference?
The instrument of saving it isn't the person. The person doesn't have to...
That's an interesting suggestion. We'll come back to that.
What he's saying here.
The action.
I'll come back and tell you what he said. Any other options?
The action of actually physically pushing.
So let's not do it by physically pushing him. Let's rig up an indirect mechanism, exactly as indirect as in the first case. If you'd like to look this up, by the way, there's a fascinating book written recently. It's called Would You Kill the Fat Man? Would You Kill the Fat Man? An excellent book by a philosopher called Edmonds, beautifully written. And he gives many more scenarios. I've only given 2. But he gives many complex scenarios to differentiate between various moral principles. But let me challenge you for a few minutes more. What is the difference between these cases? What would you say?
Because this man, we have a characteristic of this man, so he described somebody with some quality.
You mean you know who this is? He's a specific individual.
He is a big man versus the other man.
Right, that's a very good differentiation. So I'm going to answer your problem like this. In this case, this fellow happens to be a very big man. Okay? All right? Same guy, same problem, same size. If you're prejudiced against big people, same problem. In both cases, you're going to kill a fat person to save 5 people. Yeah.
Maybe it's the proximity. That person is far away and this person on the bridge is much closer.
Well, let's make him just as far. Okay? In fact, I'll put you right here. You know, in Jewish learning, we say when you make a distinction between cases, it must be a difference that makes a difference. Right? What's the operative difference? Yes?
You're directly using that man to stop the train.
That's what he said. That's good. That's good. I don't think that's enough, but I'll come back to that. Yes?
In the one case which you have up there, someone else tied him down.
Tied him down.
Yeah, someone else put him in that situation.
Yeah. So I'm going to have someone else tie this guy to the bridge. Okay? In this case, if that's your problem. I'm going to have someone else put him there too. Yes?
Okay, in this case, the man had some responsibility.
Which one? Which man?
This fat man.
You.
No,
That guy.
there,
No, he
yeah.
was tied down by the cowboys. No responsibility. Absolutely not.
He he was tied down, but
Yeah.
in the second case,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
we have responsibility for either lowering him down or pushing
In
him
both
off.
cases, I have responsibility to do nothing or choose to kill someone. Exactly the same.
Right, but in the second case, we have the responsibility of killing.
And in this case, I have the responsibility of killing him by taking
No,
the train.
You're choosing.
In
You're
both
choosing
cases,
to-
let's get this clear. In both cases, I have a choice. I can do nothing and see 5 die, or choose and kill one. Yes.
In the second case, the guy has to die in order to save the other 5.
Well, that's good. That's good. That's good. That's good. I was told Northwood Jews are America's intellectual black belts. Is that it? Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
I actually was going to echo a similar thing. So in
Yes.
the first scenario,
Yes.
somebody is going to be run over one way or another. Whether doing nothing would lead to one person or 5 people dying, or doing something would lead to.
That's in both cases the same.
Yeah, but I'm saying,
Yeah.
but however you paint that scenario,
Yeah.
somebody is in danger and someone's going.
So why do we respond so differently?
Because in the first one, ostensibly the person who's on the bridge is not actually in danger.
Neither is this man here.
Well, no.
Not at all. No, he's not at all. The train never takes that track. He's fine. He's only in danger because I'm going to see to it that he dies.
Right, but I guess, I mean, I think I would tend to agree with you, but I'm saying the reason it feels different is
Yes.
because in the second scenario, we're taking an action that actually puts him on the track where.
Well, in this case, I'm only putting the...
Otherwise, it feels like he had nothing to do with it when he's on the bridge.
But this fellow also has nothing to do with it. Okay, Philip, yeah, what she said in her article was like this. She said that she thought people would respond as you did here and as you did in the second case, and she did not know why. In fact, if you'd like to read further about this, a Jewish professor at Harvard called Mark Hauser wrote a book about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, called Moral Minds. In this book, he reports his research in which he asked many people moral dilemmas like this to make distinctions. But before he asked them the dilemmas, he asked them why they hold their moral positions. Why do you feel what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong? How do you know what's right and wrong? And people said, because they're logical. I'm a consistent thinking person, and I'm a well thought out individual, and my moral positions are logical. Then he gave them these types of scenarios. People instantly knew what to do, but could not explain why. Right? Like most of us here are struggling to explain accurately the difference between these two cases. And he came to the conclusion, this is the thesis of his book, that human beings are hardwired for morality. We have an innate sense of morals that operates at an intuitive level, at a gut level, that is not the result of intellectual conclusions. His thesis is that humans are hardwired for morality, like the current theory that humans are hardwired for language. Right? You know, one of the leading theories in linguistics today is that human beings are born with an innate language sense. The particulars of the culture you live in bring out the language in your environment. But the handling of syntax, the handling of language skills is an innate faculty. And his thesis is that human beings are innately moral. To be sure, the culture you live in brings out the details, the priorities, the balance, but we have an innate moral sense. This agrees remarkably with Judaism. If you ask a religious person why we know what's right, the knee-jerk response is to say whatever God says. I mean, wouldn't that seem logical? If you're religious, you believe in God, you say what's right is defined by what God. It doesn't get better than that. Amazingly, Judaism says that's what's right is not what God says. Or rather, more immediately, what's right is what you feel is right. Amazingly. The Torah principle here is called Derech Eretz Kadma LaTorah. That means right thinking, refined moral sense, decent and dignified human behavior, ought to come before Torah education. Amazingly. Before you engage religious teaching, you should know what's right and wrong. I'll give you the most extreme example. I mean, there are plenty of examples. But the most extreme example is there are plenty of cases throughout Torah where human beings have an intuitive sense of what's right, and they feel so strongly about it that they even use that sense to argue with God. Right? Example. God comes to Abraham, we just read it, and he says to him, I'm about to wipe out the Sodomites. Sodom is an evil society. I'm about to wipe them out. Abraham says to God, you can't do that. That's immoral. What if there's some righteous people in the city? If you wipe out a city of evil people and you include the righteous, that's an immoral, wrong act. These languages, "Hashofet kol haaretz lo ya'aseh mish," shall the judge of the whole world not do justice. Notice whom he's arguing with. God. I mean, the right response should be, God should get back to Abraham and say, Abraham, you're making a basic philosophical error. I'm God. Whatever I say by definition is right. Right? It doesn't get better than that. This happens throughout the Torah. When God says to Moses, I'm going to destroy the Jewish people, they failed. Moses turns to God and says, that's not right. What will people say? He gives him moral arguments. Right? Do you know there's a very beautiful insight into this? Do you know that when the Jewish people sinned at the golden calf, so God said to Moses, I'm about to wipe out the Jewish people. They've worshipped idols. This is the end. I've had enough. I'm going to wipe them out. So Moses said to God, you can't do that. Because you promised the forefathers that you would give the land of Israel, you'd give the land to their children, to the tribes, to the 12 tribes, right? You promised the forefathers that their descendants through the tribes, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, would inherit the land. If you wipe out the Jewish people, you'll not be fulfilling your promise. So God said, I'll keep you. I'll destroy the rest of the Jewish people. I'll preserve you. And your descendants will go and inherit the land. So Moses said to God, that's not good enough. You promised the land to the children of the forefathers, namely the tribes, the 12 tribes. I'm only representing Levi. I'm a Levite. If you rebuild the Jewish people from me, you'll be fulfilling your promise with respect to only 1/12 of your original promise. And therefore, you'll not be fulfilling your promise, and that's not good enough. So God said, okay. This is the kind of lawyer you want defending you, by the way. Right? The Medrash says that God was unable to answer him. By the way, 1 year and 3 months later, the Jewish people sinned again. The spies went into Israel. Do you remember the incident? The spies went into Israel. They came back and gave a bad report about the land. And God said to Moses exactly the same thing, I'm going to wipe them out. Moses turned to God and said, you can't do that. What will people say? People will say, you're not powerful enough to take us into the land. So God said, no, they'll say I was powerful enough to destroy the Egyptians. So Moses said, well, they'll say you were strong enough for that, but not enough to conquer the kings of Canaan, of Palestine, Israel. And therefore, people will say you're too weak. So God said, okay. And he won that debate too, but only by the skin of his teeth. And some commentaries ask the obvious question, why didn't he play the trump card that he used a year before? Again, the sequence is that when the Jewish people sinned at the golden calf, Moses used a trump card. What was that? You promised the land to all the tribes. Right? And if you destroy us, you won't be fulfilling that. A year later, when the Jewish people sin, and the spies come back, this time he doesn't use that argument. He uses a much weaker argument. People say you're not powerful enough. Why? Why could he not use the same winning hand that he used before?
It was the tribes
that did what?
that brought back that sin
In what way?
by doing what the spies did. They came back with a bad message.
The spies had just refused the land. He's now going to turn to God and say, you promised us the land through the... That was negated. Couldn't say that anymore. The spies representing the 12 tribes had just rejected the land of Israel. You can't use that as your trump card. You promised us the land. God's going to turn back and say, you rejected my land. He had to resort to a weaker argument. But the point I'm trying to make is this, that at all these junctures in Jewish history, you see righteous people arguing with God. And Job is full of it. And nowhere in the Torah do you ever find that God pulls moral rank. He never says, I'm God, what I say is right. He always says, you're right. Or he says there's stuff happened before, or stuff's going to happen afterwards that you don't know. He never simply overrides human moral intuition. That's amazing. In other words, Hashem, God expects us to have a moral sense and to stand by it, and even to challenge him. What's the obvious question on this? Can you think of a challenge to this thesis? When does God ask a human being to do something immoral? Who? Of course. When God comes to Abraham and says, I want you to kill your son, no argument. He doesn't utter a word in protest. But the reason's obvious. That's an instruction. That's a command. That's an order. Again, when your commanding officer calls you into the headquarters tent on the battlefield, and he says, I'd like to discuss military strategy with you. Speak your mind. Tell him what you think. But when he issues you an order on the battlefield, you start telling him what you think, you get shot for treason. When God issues an instruction, he gives a commandment, there's no debate. The whole nature of the test was he was commanded to do something immoral. And of course God did not want that, he stopped him. But when there's moral debate, yeah.
You say that the example that when Abraham argued about Sodom and Gomorrah,
Yes.
him about Hashem being a God of justice,
Yes.
and therefore they gave him the confidence to
Yes.
follow the command on everything.
Yes.
Without Sodom and Gomorrah, and that argument might have been a different story. Would you say that's a possibility?
It could be, but in each case you see he's bringing a moral argument and God acknowledges it. In each case. When he's given an instruction to kill his child, even though that's heinously wrong, he doesn't argue. A command is different. But we see throughout Torah human beings arguing. Of course, the Jewish sense, if you read Hauser's book, he comes to the conclusion that humans have a natural morality because we evolved it. Somewhere between orangutans and us, morality evolved. And he has biological claims for that and research findings that animals have a pre-moral sense. You can offend animals by doing unfair things to them, certain kind of animals. But of course, we say that we have an innate morality because it's imprinted into us by divine origin. That's what we say. But be that as it may, we acknowledge that we are born with a moral sense. Let me tell you some of the answers that have been given to this question. Some of you began, I think, to express something like one or two of these answers. Let me give you, first of all, a non-Jewish response to this dilemma. Philippa Foot and her contemporaries proposed to look at this through what's called the doctrine of double effect. The doctrine of double effect. I don't think this is a Jewish idea entirely, but it's certainly a very interesting thesis. The doctrine of double effect probably was first put forward by Thomas Aquinas, a Catholic thinker. He was born in 1228, he died in 1271, somewhere around there. And around the middle of the 1200s, among his voluminous writings on theology and morality, he proposed a notion called the doctrine of double effect. It's used widely today in philosophy. It's used in medical ethics today, in life and death situations. And the doctrine of double effect says, you can do an immoral act, like killing someone, when 4 conditions are met. Number 1, the act you're doing is not directly evil. You're not doing a directly evil act. 2, the evil act is only a foreseen, unwanted consequence of what you're doing. It's not directly what you're doing. You just foresee that this thing will happen anyway, and you definitely do not want it, not as a means or as an end. 3, there's no other way out of this dilemma. And 4, it's worth it. 5 against 1. 1 against 5. It has to be worth it. Well, let's see if that's correct. The doctrine of double effect says that you may divert the train here because you fulfill all 4 criteria. Number 1, diverting a train from track A to track B is not an immoral action. Would you agree? It's not a directly immoral action. The immoral action is a foreseen, unwanted consequence. You see it's going to happen that he's going to die, but you don't want it. You don't want it as a means or an end. There's no other way out of this situation, and it's worth it. 5 will be saved and only 1 will die. So far, so good? That does not apply in this case. In this case, pushing a man onto a track in the path of a train is a directly immoral act. It's an act of murder. You want him to die. You need him to die. Do you see this? Because his death will stop the train. Let me give you a proof for that. Or let me ask you, you give me a proof. Give me a proof that in this case, when I divert the train, I do not want the man to die. Prove to me that I don't want him to die. No? Yes, beautiful. Of course. If this man suddenly got free and ran away before the train arrived at that position, would I be happy? Yeah. I'd be thrilled. In this case, if this fellow jumped off the track ahead of the train, would I be happy? Yeah. I'd be devastated. That's what you meant, right? In the second case, I need him to die. That's what's going to stop the train. Do we see this? Any objections?
Yeah.
Yes.
What if that's your father?
What if what?
What if you're related to the guy next?
To this fellow here. This fellow.
Yeah.
Then I'm related to this fellow here too.
What if you are?
Oh, I see. You mean would it make a difference in either case? Yeah. Well, but it cancels out in both cases, right?
Well, that's the concentric circle.
Are you arguing that if you knew the person like it was your father,
Yes.
in neither case would you act? Okay, that's fine, that's good. But the problem we're dealing with is not what's right and wrong in these cases, but why humans respond differently to these two cases. That was her problem. Why do we have a gut reaction that is so different between these two? So Aquinas' thesis is that although we may not know it logically, we feel that in this case, an act of murder to stop the train is not acceptable. Whereas an act of consequential, right, collateral damage in the course of saving people might be. Yes?
Does the feeling after the scenario changes the moral from the first start?
Why is it the feeling afterwards and not the feeling during the scenario?
Because what I'm asking is...
You mean guilt felt afterwards?
In any scenario,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
I think there is going to be a bad feeling.
Yes.
It's just what people are scared
Yes.
and making their moral decisions.
Yes.
How bad am I going to feel after my action?
But even if you're right, you feel bad because you feel a sense of guilt that you might have done something wrong.
Not
Which,
necessarily. Not necessarily.
You mean
I feel bad because something bad happened because of my action.
But in
Not that
both-
it was right or wrong.
but in both cases, someone's dying because of your action.
Even if in the action, even if I don't do anything,
Yes.
I'm also going to feel bad
That's-
because 5 people died.
that's true.
And I had the option to stop.
That's true as well. I think you'd feel pretty bad whatever you did here.
What causes people to decide to do the change in any of those scenarios, in any of those two,
Yes.
and not do anything,
Yes.
is just because they're scared that they're going to feel very bad. Killing 5 people reverse
This
for nothing.
this may be true, but it doesn't explain the difference between the cases. Okay? You will have a moral unease in both these cases. You're probably terrible in both these cases. But why do so many people opt to divert the train in the one case and not kill? That's our problem. Yes?
What if there was a soldier that you're putting in certain death simply to slow the enemy down so the majority will have a chance to live? If you're putting him into certain death, is that still murder?
I have no idea. No idea.
It's a similar scenario.
Maybe. But let's focus now. All we're dealing with now, okay, in fact, if you read the book by Edmonds, you'll find 10 different scenarios, shifting the balance subtly in each case. Right? For example, let me give you one. Those of you who said you should divert the train, raise your hands again. Those who raised their hands. Okay. Would you say the same thing if the track looked like this? The track is now, can you see that, Les? The track is doubling back. Okay? The track is doubling back onto the main line. Would you still divert the train?
No.
Why not?
Now you're killing. You have the opportunity to be killing.
Because now you want him to die. In this case, he's going to stop the train. And if he jumps off the train's going to double back and kill the 5. So if the scenario looks like this, you've converted it to the other case. Is this clear? I don't think that's correct Jewishly, by the way. I'll come to that in a moment. But according to doctrine of double effect, in this case, you would not be allowed to divert the train. Yes?
It would kill that guy anyway.
No. The 5 people certainly going to stop.
Yeah, but the 5 people would stop it.
If one person's going to stop a train,
Then
5 certainly going to stop a train.
Okay, and those are sticks.
These are 5 big people. Okay, so that would be the case, right? So if the track looped back this way, you would be needing this person to die. You're not pushing a man onto a track, but you need his death because his death is what's going to stop the train. So that is that's what's been most cogently proposed as a solution to this question. There is a similar dilemma that's been raised in Jewish literature, and the solution is not quite the same. Here's the scenario. There was a man in Israel driving his car down the Carmel mountain in Haifa. This must have happened around 1950-ish. You've been there to Haifa, very steep mountain? Yeah. This was an Israeli fellow driving his car down the mountain when his brakes failed. Actually, this was an Israeli, so he'd never used the brakes before. Just used the horn, that's something. But his car was careening towards a bus stop in which 10 people were standing. Okay? He could not stop. There was no fault of his own. It was mechanical failure. He could turn, but only to a place where one person was standing. What should he have done? There were 10 people in front of him. If he did nothing, his car would kill all 10. He could turn, but unfortunately, the only place he could turn to was a place where one person was standing. One innocent person side of the road. Should he turn his car? It's very similar to our first case, isn't it? Okay. They asked, I don't know what he did, but people went to ask the great rabbi, the Chazon Ish. Right? He died in 1954, great leader of Torah Judaism, Jewry. The rabbi said, I think he should have turned the car. I think he should have turned. He writes this in his commentary. He says he's not certain, but he thinks probably the correct action is to turn the car. The people said, Rabbi, that contradicts a classic principle in Jewish law. What's the principle? The Talmud says, and the Rambam Maimonides rules this, what happens if a group of Jews are surrounded by terrorists and they issue an ultimatum? The ultimatum is, give us one Jew to kill or one woman to molest. If not, we'll kill everyone or molest everyone. Well, let's leave rape out of this. Murder's problematic enough. You got a group of people, and this happened repeatedly in Jewish history, by the way. In the war, this happened. If you'd like to read a book, but if you on Tisha B'Av, a time like that, you can read a classic work on this, which is known as, it's called Mina Meitzar. This is a book written by Rabbi Oshry. He was a rabbi in the Warsaw Ghetto who survived. And after the war, he was a rabbi in New York for a long time. He wrote a book about the questions he was asked in the ghetto, just before everyone was killed. The most heartbreaking book you could ever imagine reading. One of the questions he was asked was, a man came to him and said to him, the Germans have given us a quota for children to be taken to be killed tomorrow. And the community has given a quota of children, they're going to be killed. My son is one of those children, and I can save him. I have a way of bribing one of the guards, I can get my son out. But if I get my child out, they will take another Jewish child to make up the quota. Is it permitted for me, according to Jewish law, to save my own child? No. The rabbi said to him, I can't answer your question. It's a life and death question. I don't know any books. It's a wartime situation. The man said, Rabbi, I need an answer because life and death hangs in the balance and you need to tell me. The rabbi said, I cannot answer you. He said, Rabbi, I understand from your answer that it's forbidden. You're just not prepared to tell me, and he did not save his son. So this happened repeatedly, right, in Talmudic times and later. So the Talmud says, and the Rambam rules this, in fact it's universally ruled this way, that if a group of people are asked to yield one of their number to save everyone else, what's our response? Are we allowed to do that? Definitely not. We are absolutely, it's a unanimous ruling in Judaism. We cannot kill or give one to be killed, even to save many. Even though the normal calculus should be, why not? Everyone's going to get killed. If we don't, I would say, draw lots, choose one person, and say, look, my friend, if you don't step outside, they're going to kill you along with the rest of us. Could you just do us a favor and step outside, right? Because if you don't do that, everybody's going to get killed. Maimonides rules classically, and there's no discussion about this in Jewish law, we are not allowed to do that. If someone volunteers, not just volunteers, gives their life actively, that's an incredibly meritorious act. Right? We have plenty of examples of that. The Talmud itself has a case of the town of Lud. In the town of Lud, when Israel was under Roman dominion, there was a Roman girl found murdered, and the Roman governor accused the Jews of doing it, and he said, unless you find me the culprits, I'll destroy the whole city. And two Jewish brothers by the names of Pappus and Lulianus, they stepped forward, completely innocent, and they told the governor that they had done it. They had committed the murder, and he had them killed. According to most versions of the story, he knew they were lying, but he'd issued his ultimatum and he had to accept it. They were killed. The Talmud says they're guaranteed a place in the world to come because they gave their lives to save a whole city. So that sort of thing, to give your own life in such a way, and you must know even recently in Israel there was a case in the last conflict of a young Israeli sergeant who fell on a hand grenade to save 5 or 6 of the soldiers. Wartime has slightly different Jewish halachic principles, but there's no question that you can volunteer or give yourself, but we cannot choose somebody to give. What happens if they name the person they want? If they specify the person, halachically that's called yichduhu. So the terrorists surround the Jews and they say, we want Finkelmovich. We got a problem with Finkelmovich. Send him out. We want to kill him. The rest of you can go. Why? They have a problem. He didn't pay his taxes. He did something wrong. Here's a fascinating debate in Jewish law. Some Jewish authorities say you could kill him. Why? Because he's designated. We don't have to make the choice. What's the problem in the first case scenario? Who are we to choose? Who are we to say it should be you or you or you? Lots of people die. That's his problem. We can't make the choice. But in this case, we don't have to make the choice. They've chosen the one they want. The Rambam and others rule that you cannot give a person to be killed even if he's named. He has to be named and guilty. That means he has to be named, and he also has to be the reason that we're in this trouble. Even if he's not guilty of a capital offense, but he brought this murderous situation on us, then you could give the person. Right? There's a fascinating derivation for this in the Jerusalem Talmud. But we rule according to the stringency of the Rambam. We do not kill such people. But there is a position in Judaism that even if he's not guilty, but designated, that would be enough. And this is the discussion. But there's no question that the default position in Jewish law is you cannot kill someone who is an innocent party to save others. So if I'm driving my car down the hill and there's an innocent party standing on the side, and if I turn, I'll kill him, the rabbi said, do it. Isn't that a direct contradiction to our principle? Yes? No? Who said that? That's cheating. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Although you're right, in fact, whenever we analyze halachic situations, we always pretend that there's no maybes or doubts. Life is never like that. But we artificially freeze all the variables under guaranteed. This is the good old scientific method. You put all the variables in the lab, you freeze them under controlled conditions, totally unrealistic. You move each one under controlled circumstances to see the result. When I studied medicine, that's how they taught me the principles in glorious black and white clarity. It's never like that in real life. And you have to be a master of handling doubts in reality. And halachically, we do that too. But when we present a moral dilemma, okay, if I say you turn your car, you'll kill him, that's guaranteed, in order to extract the principle. Yes?
Yes, so in the first situation,
Yeah.
most of the time people are on a train track and the one person is hooked on the train track.
Yeah.
Although he's not in the line of the car and he can make a choice, but he's standing on a train track. On the second case, 5 people are on the train track, but this one person is on the beach.
What's the difference? He's still in danger if I endanger him.
Put him in the car's way, but he's not even on a train track.
Okay, I understand. I'm not sure that makes a moral difference. It's just a factual difference. I have to think about that.
It's not moral difference, but it's psychological difference that he's not on a train track.
I'm not sure how much difference that makes. Yes?
I think the point that she's trying to make is that the first situation, there are 2 different consequences, but in the second situation, there's really just one consequence that you're changing. You're using the person as a means to an end in the second situation,
Right.
and that violates some form of human dignity or their choice to be put on there. In the first situation, it wasn't their choice to be on the train track.
Fine. If that's what she meant, that's right. That's fine. I didn't understand that, but that's just fine. Okay. So let me tell you what the Chazon Ish says. Listen carefully, because this is not the doctrine of double effect, but it's the rabbi's answer to this question. Here's what he said. He said, the reason I think you can move the train is because, let me make it a bit more dramatic. Let's compare these 2 cases. You're driving your car down the hill, you're going to kill 10 people. If you turn, you'll kill 1. The rabbi said, I think you should do that. Let me give you another parallel case. You're a doctor in a hospital. You've got 5 patients in organ failure. They desperately need transplants. The nurse walks in and says, Doctor, there's a young man in the waiting room. He's come to see his mother. Let's cut his throat, take 5 organs, and save 5 lives. Should we? But again, in both cases, you're killing somebody to save 5 people. Right? So here's what the rabbi said. He said that if the terrorists give you a gun and they say, these 10 people are going to die. We're going to kill them unless you kill one innocent person. Take this gun, kill him. That would be utterly forbidden in Jewish law. And the rabbi said the reason is because that's an act of murder. His language was, Ze ma'aseh achzari shel retzicha. That is a direct, cruel act of murder. The consequences of your act is 10 will be saved. That's not allowed in Judaism. But when you're driving a car down a hill and you turn your car away from 10 people in the street, that is an act of salvation. He said it's called a ma'aseh hatzalah. Again, there are 10 people in front of me and I swerve away from them. That's what a driver should be doing. It's true the same action will kill one. And that's why he says I hesitate to give a final ruling. But it's a very far cry from taking a gun and murdering somebody so that others survive. Is this clear? This is not the doctrine of double effect. This is a different approach. This is not found in classic Talmudic literature. But the great Chazon Ish made that distinction. And I'll say it again. If your act is an act of murder, it's not allowed, even if many will survive as a consequence. The Torah does not allow that. But if your act is an act of saving, as a result of which many will be saved and fewer will die, it's possible to consider such an act. Yes?
This be likened to what's today called collateral damage, which we see all the time.
Yes.
Civilians
Yes.
die, and when others...
The question here is about collateral damage. Yes. The problem is your example is wartime. In Jewish law, wartime has other parameters. I'll give you one example. Here's an example. In 1973 in Israel, there were some Israeli soldiers being fired upon by other Israelis. You know, sometimes in war, you have what they call friendly fire, right? Mistaken identity. So what you had was a group of Israeli boys being fired upon by another group of Israelis. Mortar fire from a distance. They did not know, they believed they were the enemy. At a distance was a third group of soldiers who saw what was happening and couldn't communicate with either group. And in this third group were some religious soldiers. And they knew the law of Rodef. The law of Rodef says, if you see someone trying to kill somebody else, okay, and the only way you can save the victim is by killing the aggressor, right? If that's the case, then you are obliged to kill the aggressor. That's your only option. Of course, if you can wound them, that's what you have to do. So they said, look, these people are trying to kill those. So our duty is to kill them, to kill these, to save those. They had a terrible argument about it on the battlefield, and they did not fire. They held their fire, and people in the first group died. When they got home, these fellows in the third group, they went to see Rav Elyashiv, great rabbi in Jerusalem. What should we have done? He said, there's no way you'd be allowed to fire. These people are doing what they ought to be doing in wartime under genuine case of mistaken identity. Right? This is not their fault. The Talmudic language is min shemaya karad filei. From heaven they are pursued. And therefore in war you wouldn't be able to do this. Right? That's not always the case. The Rambam rules that if a fetus threatens the life of the mother, we destroy the fetus to save the life of the mother. Even though the fetus is innocently a danger, just like these soldiers are innocently a danger, the fetus is judged to be a pursuer on the life of the mother. We kill the fetus. These soldiers are not considered to be pursuers on the life of the soldier. Why exactly? Think about for homework. Fascinating question. I'll give you one more example to show you that war has different rules than civilian circumstances. There was a group of Israeli soldiers sent into Lebanon. I actually heard this from a doctor whose friend was the doctor present. They're a large group of soldiers, and they had with them a very senior-ranking Israeli army surgeon who was accompanying this mission. With him was an 18-year-old paramedic who was attached to that division. After they crossed the border, one soldier was very badly injured. And this doctor, who was not a religious person at all, quite the contrary, he said that he checked the soldier's wounds, and he realized that he was so badly injured that if he radioed for a helicopter to have him flown back to the military hospital in Haifa, he'd almost certainly survive, but only if he accompanied him in the helicopter. But to do that, he have to leave the other men without a doctor in the field. But if he sent him back with a medic, he'd almost certainly die. But then he could stay with his men. He said he had no idea what to do. And on the battlefield, for the first time in his secular life, he started praying very hard. And what happened was a big helicopter came and took them all. Now, that's not the point of the story. Although, that's the point of another story. But when he got home, he told his religious friend, and I heard it from him, and he said, what should I have done? And the religious doctor went to ask Rabbi Yashiv, the same rabbi in Jerusalem, and the rabbi said, if that would have been a civilian scenario, there's no question you have to accompany the injured man. Why? Because you have in front of you a definitely endangered person, and a possibly will be injured later. In halakha, we call that a vadai against a safek, a certainty against a doubt, even though the doubt may include many people. But right now, there's a definite injury, and therefore, right, and other soldiers may be injured later. If that would be a civilian scenario, there's no question you go home with the injured man. But in the army, you stay put. If this mission needs you to be present, and the danger to life has already been factored in as necessary, and if necessary, we prepare to give our lives in this military action, if necessary, the army has different rules. So collateral damage in war would not follow the same rules that we're talking about tonight. Let me leave you with one final thought. Unless you have any questions, I'm happy. Yeah.
Would the moral relative, like the hypothesis be that most people would intuitively turn away from the crowd?
Yes, the question, yes. The Robertson's question is, would the intuitive action be turning away from people in your path? I think it would be. And I think you can illustrate this quite clearly. Imagine you're driving your car towards 10 people, right? And if you swerve, you'll kill one. Let's modify the scenario. There are 10 people in front of you in the street. You come around a bend. You see 10 people in the street. If you swerve as hard as you can, you'll miss 9 but just kill 1. Should you swerve? This is a no-brainer, right? Okay. Let's say you will swerve and you'll miss all 10 but kill 1 person who wasn't part of the lineup in the first place. Is it that different? Probably not. And therefore, I think that would be but they give you a gun and say, shoot that person and we'll save others. We don't feel that's right. Yes?
We know when they had the Beit HaMikdash,
Yeah.
every year in Yom Kippur, they used to send the korban to Azazel.
Yeah.
The Gemara teaches us that the person who used to throw it,
Yes.
the korban used to die 100% that year.
Yes.
Okay? Now, are you allowed to send that guy or not?
Well, they did, didn't they?
Oh, well, the Gemara says they were lucky because people volunteered to do that.
Right.
And the people that volunteered were sick people that would anyways die.
So that's a solution.
They were lucky.
Right.
Let's take a scenario where
Yeah.
they're not so lucky.
Yeah.
Where everyone stands up and says, we don't want to do it. We
I
want
don't-
to volunteer.
yeah, good
Because the law of the Torah
Yes.
is to throw the korban. The
Yes.
Jewish people have
Yes.
to pick one
Yes.
and appoint him to do it,
Yes.
even though we know he's going to die or not. According to the moral, if you put the halacha in terms of moral,
Yes.
here you have a conflict.
I don't know. You'll have to ask Rabbi Khan and Rabbi Kosh after the class, right? I don't know. Good question. I don't know. But let me leave you with one final thought. Yes.
What about the initial Siamese twins?
Yes.
Separating Siamese twins.
Yes.
For sure die.
So I have a whole presentation on that problem when 2 Siamese twins are joined in such a way that if you separate them, you may save one, but if you do nothing, they'll both die. With your permission, I'm not going to go into that now in detail. It's a wonderful and long discussion. If you go to a website called simpletoremember.com, there's many speakers there, but under my name, you'll find some dozens of talks. There's one there on separating Siamese twins. So if you don't mind. I also wrote a book called Dangerous Disease and Dangerous Therapy, which discusses those principles. And although it's a difficult book, if you buy 2 copies, I think you'll understand it much better. Right. But let me leave you with one final thought. We began with a fascinating person called Philippa Foot, very interesting lady. Let's end with an equally fascinating individual. There is a theory in moral philosophy known as utilitarianism. This means that instead of making all these fancy footwork calculations, drop all of that and simply look at numbers. Just look at numbers. You got 5 against 1, always opt to kill the 1. This thing's going to explode. Thanks, Mark. Let's just collapse it here. Yeah, thanks. Okay. It's fine. Just put it down here. It's fine. Yeah. Okay. If you have, it did its job, right? Okay. if you have 5 against 1, the correct moral approach is kill the one, save 5. In other words, a very simple proposal for solving all society's moral problems. The greatest good for the greatest number. Or as it's often been phrased, the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Right? You see that? Very simple, straightforward. Diverting, killing, the nature of the act, all the sophisticated moralizing is irrelevant. This was proposed originally, it has a long antiquity, history, but perhaps best known was a man called Jeremy Bentham. He was an English deacon. He was an instructor at University College in London in the late 1700s, and he proposed, later it was modified by John Stuart Mill, a theory of utilitarianism. Simply look at the numbers. Whatever decisions you have to make in society, triage decisions, you don't have enough facilities, medical facilities, whatever it is, do that which saves or benefits the greatest number. This has never been accepted as the basic premise on which morality should be based. Yes?
What do you do? I'm thinking, what do you do for the Jews because there's so few of us versus everyone else? I'm saying in the world.
According to Bentham, you would wipe out whoever you have to wipe out if you could save more. Give me a minute, I'll try to explain. Bentham, by the way, was a very interesting man. If you'd like to see Jeremy Bentham, who died in 17, whatever it was, you can see him today. His body is preserved, and it sits in a glass case in the main hall of University College in London. Before he died, he left instructions in his will that he wanted to be preserved, embalmed, and put in a glass case in the university hall, and at every Senate meeting to be wheeled out to the table to be present. Nowadays, they don't actually wheel out his body, they just bring his head. His head is in a box on the side. The body is preserved, there's a wax head. The head is locked in a box because the King's College students used to steal it all the time. But the head is now brought, I'm not kidding you, it's brought to every meeting and is registered as present but not voting. Okay? How do I know this? Because in one of the great classic works of halachic analysis of the last few years, a work by Rabbi Grosnas, Dayan in London, a young student at University College who's a Cohen asked him the following question. I'm a Cohen. A Cohen may not have any contact with dead bodies. And a Cohen may not go into a room or a space that's enclosed in which there's a dead body. I attend this university. Every morning I walk through the hall. There's no alternative route. Or there's a very difficult alternative route. Am I, as a Cohen, allowed to walk through that hall where Bentham's body is present? And there's a fascinating response on this. And he says as follows. He says that a Cohen may not have contact with a body, whether it's Jewish or not. Jewish body, non-Jewish body. But to be in a room where a body is present only applies to a Jewish body. A non-Jewish body in a space is not a problem. But then he says, on second thoughts, a Cohen may have no contact with a grave, whether the grave is the grave of a Jew or non-Jew. This may very well be Bentham's grave. This is where he's permanently interred. Go around, right? Don't walk through the hall. Anyway, that's a halachic question, and that's where it is. But he proposed a theory of utilitarianism. Why has this never become accepted? Although it's a very simple formula. There's a book called Morality, written by Bernard Williams. He was a professor of philosophy at Cambridge. He wrote a wonderful, user-friendly book for the layman called Morality. He died about 2 years ago, I think, 3-4 years maybe. And in this book, he shows that utilitarianism, although it's very appealing and very simple, is not acceptable. And the reason is amazing. The reason is because our gut does not respond correctly. We have an intuition that this is probably wrong. And that's good enough to raise as a critique on this theory. He illustrates it very simply. He says, and after tonight's discussion, I think this should be clear. His illustration is this. He says, imagine you're backpacking in South America, and you stumble into a little village, Peruvian village, high in the Peruvian Andes. And as you stumble into this village square, you see 20 men lined up against the wall, about to be shot by a firing squad. And just before they fire, they see you. And they pull you in, they say, Americano, whoa, they bring you in. And they say, in honor of Il Dictatore's birthday, we're going to let you kill one of these men and 19 will walk free. They give you a gun and they stand there clapping and speaking in Spanish, and they offer you the opportunity to shoot any of these 20 men so that 19 will be freed. Raise your hand if you do it. Not even you?
He could kill himself.
No one? Williams says, although the logic of that situation is you should certainly do it. If you don't do it, 20 are going to die. You could save 19 lives. We feel that it's wrong, or we feel we could not do it. And he said that feeling is good enough. What he's telling you is that at the deepest level of our moral sensitivity and sensibility is really an innate intuition. And that is accurate Jewishness. And that is why when you bring up your children, or you bring yourself up, you educate yourself in a moral and refined spiritual path. The Jewish axiom is that you ought to know what's right and wrong. You ought to have a refined sense of what's dignified and right thinking and moral without reference to religion. The formal way we say this in Judaism is that mankind was given 7 laws before the Torah was given. The 7 natural laws of mankind: not allowed to steal, not allowed to kill. Those you do not need spiritual education for. Let me leave you with one final thought. You know, it's an amazing thing, it's been pointed out often, that if you examine all human societies, you'll find that there's total unanimity and agreement on every single moral principle throughout all societies, all geographic locations, and all societies in history. Amazing thing. That means if you talk about any single moral principle, they have always been agreed by virtually all of humanity. Killing for no reason is wrong. No one argues with it. Stealing is wrong. No one argues. Even though Margaret Mead, a famous sociologist, she argued that there are pre-moral societies, societies that don't have any moral sense at all. She did her work in Samoa, right? She said if you go to Samoa or Papua New Guinea, they don't have a sophisticated sense of morality. First of all, she's been thoroughly discredited, but I can assure you, if you go to Samoa and you steal the breakfast of the savage next to you, see if he accepts it with serene equanimity, right? He'll have your scalp. There's no society that says that torturing a child for no reason is wrong. Not showing gratitude to somebody who saved your life is wrong. Letting someone down when you promise them to do something that they're relying on you for. These are universally agreed. Where there's no agreement is when moral principles conflict. There's never been agreement. Can you kill one to save many? Can you torture a child? There's a big debate in American moral philosophy today. Is it moral to torture a terrorist to get information from him that might save many lives?
Yes.
Well, there are those who disagree with you. Alan Dershowitz wrote a book, very interesting book called Why Terrorism Works. And he advances the argument that it's entirely moral to torture somebody if you could save many lives by doing it. But it's far from agreed. In other words, where moral principles conflict, how you make a hierarchy of moral principles is not at all agreed. But basic moral intuition, the basic moral principles, when they're not in conflict, we all agree on. And therefore, the thought to take away from this discussion is that religion, formal religion, is not really technically the answer to human morality. We expect a basis for morality to be present before we're talking about religion. Obviously, it is because Torah projects that into the world. Obviously, we are formed in that image. That's why we have our sensitivity. But it's possible to work in an educational program. It's possible to work with children and develop a sense of fairness and right, distinction in right and wrong, before we even talk about formal religion. Thank you.